Bruh, I want to be careful with this because the moment you say it out loud, people think you're reaching. But I noticed something, and once you hear it, you can't unhear it. This wasn't about what was said, it was about how it was said and who it didn't sound like. When someone's voice changes overnight, when the edges disappear, when the words suddenly feel managed, that's usually not growth. That's not healing either. That's control showing up quietly. And the scary part is, most people clap before they realize what just happened.
Stop it. Get some help.
I want to explain exactly when this clicked for me because it wasn't some dramatic headline moment. It was subtle, almost boring, and that's what made it dangerous. I read the statement once, nodded, kept scrolling. Then something pulled me back. Not the words, the tone. The cadence felt unfamiliar, too smooth, too orderly. You know when someone you've known forever texts you and the message is fine, but your body goes,
"Wait a minute. Who are you?"
nah, that's not them. Yeah, that feeling. Apologies don't usually erase personality. Growth doesn't sand off someone's edges overnight. But this sounded like a document that had been handled. No pauses, no contradictions, no mess, no ego leaks, which is wild because real remorse is messy as hell. When someone's voice suddenly loses rhythm, slang, emotion, unpredictability, that's not maturity, that's filtration. And once you notice the voice is different, you stop arguing about the apology entirely because now the question isn't, is this sincere? It's, who approved this?
Shit, I don't even know. Like, I can't even tell you that. Like,
that's when I knew this story wasn't about accountability. It was about authorship. Here's the trick that works every single time. If someone gets quieter, calmer, more polished, people assume they're healthier. No one asks why the volume dropped. They just clap because the noise stopped bothering them. We've trained ourselves to believe that discomfort equals damage and silence equals progress. That's backwards. Healing doesn't usually look clean at first. It looks inconsistent. It sounds unsure. Sometimes it sounds angry, confused, contradictory. But the moment someone starts sounding presentable, institutions relax, brands relax, audiences relax. And that's the tell, because the calm didn't come from within, it came from containment. People don't realize this, but polish always benefits the people around you more than it benefits you. Your silence doesn't prove peace, it proves compliance. And the scariest part, most people celebrate this phase. They call it growth because it makes them more comfortable. Let's be honest, apologies aren't written anymore. They're assembled. Legal risk, brand exposure, market perception, mental health framing, all of it gets weighed before a single sentence lands on the page. That's why these statements don't sound human. They sound optimized. There's a whole process behind this. Draft, review, tone softening, liability trimming, empathy injection, final approval. And by the time it reaches the public, the person at the center is barely recognizable in it. Not because they didn't sign off, but because signing off doesn't mean authoring. This is the part people miss. You can approve something you didn't create. You can agree to words that aren't yours. And once someone else controls the language, they control the narrative of who you are now. That's when apologies stop being about repair and start being about permission. Here's where the whole game flips, and most people don't even notice it happen. The moment someone is publicly framed as unwell, the rules of credibility change. Not officially, socially. Everything they said before gets reinterpreted as symptoms. Everything said for them gets treated as truth. And notice how clean that move is. No argument needed, no debate, no evidence required.
We don't do that here.
Because once the label is in place, disagreement becomes cruelty, questioning becomes insensitive, and silence becomes support. Mental health language didn't just become more accepted, it became authoritative. That doesn't mean mental illness isn't real. It means the language around it now has power. Power to override intent, power to override memory, power to decide who gets to speak. And once that switch flips, The person at the center doesn't even need to be wrong anymore. They just need to be managed. Because this is exactly why people feel uneasy about Kanye West, even if they can't explain it. Supporting someone means helping them express themselves. Substituting someone means expressing for them. And those two things look identical from the outside, right up until the voice disappears. That's the line that got crossed here. Because what we're hearing now isn't chaotic Kanye. It's not defiant Kanye. It's not even reflective Kanye. It's a version that sounds like it was agreed upon in a room he didn't control. You can tell when someone's words are theirs because they take risks. They contradict themselves. They leave things unresolved. This didn't do any of that, which tells me the goal wasn't expression. It was stabilization. And stabilization, when it comes from the outside, always comes with conditions. Here's the part that makes people uncomfortable. Because there's no villain speech. No explosion, no moment you can clip. Power doesn't shift through force anymore. It shifts through access. Who can post? Who can speak? Who can answer questions? Who can show up unfiltered? You don't silence someone by gagging them. You silence them by helping them rest, helping them recover, helping them stay out of trouble. And every layer of help adds another layer of permission. Eventually, they don't even need to say no to you. You stop asking. That's when the shift is complete. Not when the person disappears, but when everyone else starts speaking instead of them. And the wild part, most people don't notice a thing. This is the first thing that always goes, and it's never an accident. Before someone loses visibility, before access gets restricted, the voice gets adjusted. It's the least noticeable change, which is exactly why it works. The vocabulary tightens up. The sentences get safer. The emotional swings disappear. Suddenly, everything sounds neutral, considerate, balanced, like it went through spell check and a legal review. Real people don't talk like that when they're processing something real. They ramble. They contradict themselves. They double back and say the wrong thing before they say the right one. But when a voice changes first, it tells you the priority isn't truth anymore. The priority is containment. It's about reducing unpredictability, not increasing clarity. You'll notice the jokes vanish too. The humor dries up. Anything that could be misread, clipped, or taken out of context quietly disappears. That's when you know this isn't self-control. It's external control dressed up as maturity. And once the voice is sanitized, everything else becomes easier to manage. Because if you can't recognize the voice, you can't recognize when it's missing. And that's the whole point. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The public likes this stage. It feels calm. It feels responsible. It feels like the problem is finally being handled. People don't actually want understanding. They want relief. They want the noise to stop without having to think about what caused it. So when someone stops being unpredictable, stops being raw, stops making people uncomfortable, they call it growth. Not because it is, but because it's quieter. Nobody asks what was lost in the process. Nobody asks what got filtered out. They just say, see? They're better now. This is why applause is such a bad signal in moments like this. Applause usually means the audience is comfortable, not that the situation is healthy. And once the crowd approves the new version, going back becomes dangerous. Any deviation starts looking like regression instead of honesty. That's how the public becomes part of the containment system, not on purpose, just by clapping at the wrong time. This is where it stops being about one person and starts looking familiar, because the sequence is almost always the same. Chaos first, then concern, then control. At the beginning, everyone says they need help. That sounds compassionate, and sometimes it is. But watch what happens after that phrase becomes the consensus. Once concern turns into coordination, access starts shrinking. Interviews stop. Direct communication disappears. Everything goes through channels. Then comes the curated presence. A photo here, a statement there, enough visibility to say they're around, but not enough to hear them think. And people say, at least they're okay, but no one can actually explain what okay means anymore. It just means quiet. This pattern doesn't end with someone being destroyed. It ends with someone being managed. And management is a lot easier to defend than force. By the time people start asking what really happened, the shift is already complete, and reversing it suddenly looks irresponsible. When people start asking, where is he? That's not paranoia. That's instinct kicking in. Humans are wired to notice absence before we can articulate it. Nobody asks that question when someone is simply resting. They ask it when presence feels incomplete, when something doesn't line up. You can't fake presence forever. You can show images, release statements, leak updates, but if the person isn't there, people feel it. That's why the question keeps popping up even when there's nothing new. The mind knows something is missing long before the mouth can explain what. And notice how fast that question gets shut down. Stop speculating. Respect privacy. You're doing too much. That's usually a sign you touched the edge of something real. Because if everything was fine, the question wouldn't be threatening. It would be answerable. The fact that it lingers tells you presence has been reduced to appearances, and appearances don't satisfy instinct. This is the modern solution. Don't disappear the person completely, just remove their authorship. You'll still see them walking, you'll still see photos, you might even see them smiling, but you won't hear them think. Speech is risky. Speech creates liability. Speech can't be edited once it's out there. So instead, visibility becomes symbolic, enough to say, see, they're fine, not enough to know who's actually in control. It's presence without agency, existence without voice, a person reduced to proof of life content. And the wild part is how normalized this has become. People accept it because it looks peaceful on the surface, but peace without authorship isn't peace. It's containment that learned how to smile. Here's the part nobody likes admitting. The person is rarely the top priority. What's being protected is everything around them. Brands, contracts, partnerships, legal exposure, public sentiment. All of that becomes fragile when someone speaks freely. So the system steps in, not to heal the person, but to stabilize the ecosystem. The human becomes the variable that needs controlling. That's why the language is always about best interest. It sounds caring, but it's vague on purpose. Best for who exactly? Because if the person's well-being was the only goal, their voice wouldn't be optional. Expression wouldn't be treated like a risk factor. What gets preserved is predictability. What gets sacrificed is agency. And once you see that clearly, it's impossible to unsee what this phase is really about. Losing your voice happens quietly. Regaining it is loud, messy, and suspicious to everyone watching. That's why the second part almost never happens cleanly. Once other people start speaking for you, your own words get reclassified as instability. Any deviation from the approved tone suddenly looks like a setback. The system gets used to predictability fast. So when you try to sound like yourself again, it doesn't read as authenticity. It reads as risk. That's the trap. The more control that's added in the name of safety, the more dangerous freedom starts to look.
A bullshit? A bullshit? A bullshit? A bullshit?
People say, just focus on getting better. But what they really mean is, don't disrupt what we've already adjusted to. At that point, your voice isn't something you own anymore. It's something you have to reapply for. And that's why so many people never sound like themselves again. Not because they can't, because the cost becomes too high. This is the question everyone avoids because there's no clean answer. At what point does help quietly turn into ownership? Not control in a movie villain way. Control through decisions, permissions, and advice that can't really be refused. When someone else decides when you speak, how you speak, and what tone is acceptable, that's no longer support, that's governance. And the scary part is how easy it is to justify. All you have to say is that it's for their own good. That phrase has covered up more power grabs than any threat ever could, because it sounds moral while removing agency. Once that line is crossed, getting it back doesn't look brave. It looks irresponsible. That's the real danger here. Not that someone loses their voice, but that everyone agrees they're better off without it. This story isn't really about one man, one apology, or one moment in the news. It's about how power has learned to move quietly. No force, no chaos, just calm language, clean statements, and decisions made for your own good. Culturally, we've started confusing silence with healing and polish with truth. We reward anything that feels stable, even when that stability comes at the cost of agency. And once that trade happens, we call it maturity, so we don't have to wrestle with what we lost. From a human behavior standpoint, this makes sense. People don't like unpredictability. Institutions don't like risk, so the system doesn't crush you, it edits you. It smooths you out until you're safe enough to exist, but not dangerous enough to speak. That's why this keeps repeating. Not because people are evil, but because control wrapped in compassion is easier to accept than control wrapped in force. And once everyone agrees it's for the best, the voice rarely comes back the same. So here's the real question I want you to sit with. How many times have we applauded growth without asking who actually gained the power? If this made you uncomfortable, good. Go watch the next video where I break down another moment related to Kanye that people thought was progress and show you what was really happening underneath. I'll see you on the next one.
Panda, 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 panda.
Panda out.